The afternoon Olivia Nelson handed her credit card to a struggling father. She thought it was the perfect social experiment. It began as mockery in the marble lobby of the Nelson Plaza, where corporate executives gathered to discuss strategies they would abandon by evening. When Louis McCrae knocked a tablet off the reception counter and apologized with trembling hands, Olivia watched with the disdain of someone who had never known desperation. On impulse, she slid her platinum card across the white desk toward him. 24 hours, she said loud enough for the hotel staff to hear. By the life you're failing at. Louis took the card without argument, without shame, without even looking at her face. He simply picked it up and walked toward the exit, his daughter's hand in his. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and it proves that powerful stories resonate everywhere. Olivia Nelson believed that success was visible. She had spent her entire career building an empire based on appearance, image, and the kind of polish that only wealth could provide. As the CEO of Nelson Hospitality Group, she owned luxury hotels and had made a fortune teaching others how to look successful. To her, poverty wasn't just about having no money. It was about having no standards, no discipline, no worth. That Tuesday afternoon at the Nelson Plaza, her belief system was about to be challenged in a way she never expected. She had arrived for the annual executive summit dressed in her signature style: red top, white skirt, perfect hair, expensive shoes. Everything about her screamed control and power. The lobby was filled with other executives, all dressed similarly, all there to network and make deals that would probably fall apart within weeks. Louis McCrae was not supposed to be there. He had come to inquire about renting a small community room for a support group he was trying to organize for single parents in the area. The hotel offered discounted rates for community groups, and Louis had hoped he might afford a few hours on a weeknight. He was distracted when he approached the reception desk because his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was coughing again. She had been sick for 3 days, and the cough was getting worse. The accident happened in seconds. Louis turned too quickly. His elbow hit a metal clipboard on the counter, and both the clipboard and an expensive tablet crashed to the floor. The tablet's screen shattered. The clipboard landed near Olivia's feet. Everyone in the lobby turned to look. Louis apologized immediately, his voice filled with genuine distress. He offered to pay for the damage, even though anyone could see he couldn't afford it. His clothes were worn, his shoes were old, and his daughter was clinging to his hand, coughing into her sleeve. Everything about him signaled struggle. Olivia looked at him with complete contempt. In her mind, this man represented everything she had worked her entire life to avoid being associated with: poverty, carelessness, failure. She didn't see a father worried about his sick child. She saw a liability, a person who didn't meet her standards of acceptable humanity. That's when she decided to conduct what she considered a social experiment. She had always believed that poor people were poor because they made bad decisions. She believed that if you gave them money, they would waste it on temporary pleasures instead of investing in their future. She wanted to prove this theory, and she wanted to do it in front of witnesses. Olivia pulled her platinum credit card from her designer clutch and slid it across the marble counter toward Louis. She told him he had 24 hours to spend whatever he wanted. She made sure her voice was loud enough for the hotel staff and several nearby executives to hear. She told him to buy the life he was clearly failing at, and to make sure he was gone before she checked out the next day. The other executives nearby watched with amusement. Some of them chuckled. They all understood what Olivia was doing. She was making a spectacle of this poor man, turning his poverty into entertainment. It was cruel, but in their world, it was also considered clever. Louis looked at the platinum card on the counter for a long moment. Olivia expected him to refuse out of pride, or to thank her profusely, or to show some kind of emotional reaction that would confirm her superiority. Instead, Louis simply picked up the card, nodded once without making eye contact, and walked toward the exit with his daughter's hand in his. Olivia watched him leave with satisfaction. She had set her trap. She was certain that within 24 hours, her credit card statement would show charges from expensive restaurants, electronic stores, maybe even a car dealership. She would have proof that desperate people couldn't be trusted with wealth. She would have a story to tell at dinner parties for years. What Olivia didn't know was that Louis McCrae wasn't thinking about himself at all. He was thinking about his daughter, about the 7 other children in the pediatric ward at City General Hospital, and about the fact that he had exactly 24 hours to do something impossible. That evening, Olivia attended the Executive Summit's opening gala. It was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, a space decorated with crystal chandeliers and ice sculptures. Wealthy business owners mingled with investors, everyone holding champagne glasses and exchanging business cards. Olivia was in her element. She spent the first hour networking, discussing her latest project, a lifestyle brand that taught people how to elevate their presence through expensive clothing and accessories. Around 8 o'clock, her phone began buzzing with notifications. Olivia normally would have ignored them during an event, but the frequency of the alerts caught her attention. She excused herself from a conversation and checked her phone. The first notification showed a charge of $25,000 for something called Priority Lab Rental 24-hour access. Olivia frowned. She assumed there had been a mistake or fraud. But then another notification appeared. $18,000 for molecular centrifuge equipment lease. Then another, $32,000 for chemical precursors expedited delivery. Olivia's confusion turned to anger. This wasn't what she had expected at all. Where were the charges for expensive dinners? Where were the jewelry store purchases or the luxury car down payments? These charges were scientific, technical, completely outside the pattern she had anticipated. More notifications kept coming. $14,000 for cryogenic storage, $9,000 for laboratory safety equipment, $6,000 for computational analysis software. The amounts were staggering, and they were all go to scientific supply companies and research facilities. Olivia left the gala immediately. She went up to her suite and opened her banking app on her laptop to get more details. The charges were all legitimate and had been approved. The card was being used at a private biotech research facility on the other side of the city. She used the card's GPS tracking feature and found the exact location, a small independent lab that rented space to freelance researchers. Her first thought was that Louis was somehow scamming her. Maybe he was buying equipment to resell on the black market. Maybe he had connections to criminals who were using her card to fund illegal operations. The idea that he might be doing something legitimate didn't even occur to her. Olivia called her head of security and told him to prepare a team. They would go to the facility at dawn and confront Louis. She would have him arrested for fraud, even if the charges were technically authorized. She would make sure everyone knew that her social experiment had uncovered a criminal. What Olivia didn't know was that at that exact moment, Louis McCrae was standing in a small laboratory wearing a white coat, surrounded by equipment he hadn't used in 5 years. He was working faster than he had ever worked in his life, because 8 children were dying, and he was the only person in the city who knew how to save them. Louis had once been a promising biotech researcher specializing in respiratory diseases. He had worked for a major pharmaceutical company and had been on track to develop important treatments. But when his wife died suddenly from an aneurysm 3 years earlier, Louis had left his career to focus on raising Lily alone. He took a job at a warehouse to have stable hours and be present for his daughter. His scientific work became a distant memory. 3 days earlier, a rare viral outbreak had hit the pediatric ward at City General Hospital. 8 children, including Lily, had been infected. The virus attacked the respiratory system and was highly resistant to standard treatments. The hospital had contacted pharmaceutical companies and research institutions, but nobody was willing to mobilize resources for such a small outbreak. It wasn't profitable enough. The children weren't important enough. The doctors had given the children steroids and oxygen, but it wasn't working. They were getting worse. Lily's cough had become so severe that she could barely sleep. The other children were in similar or worse condition. One of the doctors at the hospital, Dr. Patel, had remembered Louis from a medical conference years earlier. She tracked him down at the warehouse where he worked and begged him for help. Louis knew exactly what needed to be done. The virus could be neutralized by a specific enzyme compound that he had studied during his research years. The compound wasn't commercially available because it was too expensive to produce for such rare cases. But Louis knew the formula. He knew the synthesis process. He could make it himself if he had access to the right equipment and materials. The problem was money. To synthesize the compound, Lewis needed access to a professional laboratory with specific equipment, a molecular centrifuge, cryogenic storage, precision measurement tools, and rare chemical precursors that cost thousands of dollars. The total cost would be around $90,000, and Lewis had exactly $300 in his bank account. He had gone to the Nelson Plaza that day to inquire about the community room not for a support group, but because he was desperately trying to find any space with basic equipment he could use. He had been turned away. He had been ready to give up and watch his daughter and 7 other children die. Then Olivia Nelson had handed him her credit card. Lewis didn't think of it as a gift or a joke. He thought of it as a tool that had appeared at exactly the moment he needed it. He didn't care about Olivia's intentions or her cruelty. He only cared about the fact that he now had access to the resources he needed to save 8 lives. He immediately went to the biotech facility and rented their premium lab space for 24 hours. He ordered all the necessary equipment and materials with expedited delivery. Everything arrived within 4 hours. By midnight, Lewis was running the first synthesis cycle. The compound was extremely difficult to create. It required precise temperatures, specific timing, and constant monitoring. One mistake would ruin the entire batch, and he didn't have time or money for a second attempt. Lewis worked through the entire night. He hadn't done this kind of work in years, but his hands remembered the movements. His mind remembered the formulas. He was exhausted and terrified, but he kept going because there was no alternative. By 4 a.m, he had successfully synthesized 8 doses of the compound. Each dose was contained in a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. It looked like water, but it represented hours of intense labor and $90,000 worth of resources. More importantly, it represented 8 children who would live to see another day. Lewis was carefully labeling the vials when he heard loud voices in the hallway outside the lab. Someone was demanding to be let in. Someone was threatening to call the police. Lewis knew immediately who it was. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. Olivia Nelson burst into the laboratory with her security team behind her. She was still wearing her evening dress from the gala, though she had thrown a coat over it. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her face was tight with anger. She had been awake all night, furious and confused by the charges on her credit card. She had built up a complete narrative in her mind about what she would find: stolen equipment, illegal activity, proof that Louis McCrae was exactly the kind of person she had assumed he was. What she found instead stopped her in her tracks. The laboratory was small but professional, filled with modern equipment that was currently running through cool-down cycles. Computer monitors displayed complex molecular structures and data readouts. The air smelled like chemicals and disinfectant, and in the center of it all stood Louis McCrae, wearing a white lab coat, carefully placing 8 small glass vials into a temperature-controlled carrier case. He looked up when Olivia entered, but his expression didn't change. He didn't look guilty or afraid. He looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his hands had small chemical burns on them from working so quickly, but his eyes were clear and focused. Olivia's security team spread out around the room, ready to restrain Louis if necessary. Olivia herself walked forward, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She was ready to unleash her anger, to accuse him of theft and fraud, to have him arrested and make an example of him. But before she could speak, Louis held up one of the vials to the light. He examined it carefully, checking for any imperfections in the liquid. Satisfied, he placed it gently in the case with the others. Then he turned to Olivia and told her story. He told her about his daughter Lily, who had been coughing for 3 days and could barely breathe. He told her about the 7 other children in the pediatric ward who were infected with the same virus. He told her about how the hospitals and pharmaceutical companies had refused to help because 8 children weren't enough to justify the cost. He told her about his past life as a researcher and how he had left that world behind when his wife died. He told her about the compound he had just spent 12 hours synthesizing, a treatment that would neutralize the virus and save all 8 children. He told her that the compound was extremely expensive to produce and that without her credit card, he would have had no way to make it. He told her that the materials he had purchased expired at dawn, which was why he had worked through the night without stopping. Then Lewis closed the carrier case and locked it. He walked to where he had left his worn gray sweater and pulled Olivia's platinum credit card from the pocket. He placed the card on the stainless steel counter between them. Next to the card, he placed a folder containing detailed receipts for every purchase he had made, along with scientific documentation of what he had created and why. The folder included contact information for Dr. Patel at City General Hospital, who could verify everything Lewis had said. Lewis looked at Olivia directly for the first time since taking her card. He told her that he hadn't bought a life. He had bought time. Time for 8 children who deserved to grow up. Time that money could purchase, but only purpose could use correctly. Then he picked up the carrier case and walked past Olivia and her security team toward the door. He paused in the doorway and said one more thing. He thanked her, not for her charity or her kindness, because they both knew she had offered neither. He thanked her for having a credit limit high enough to fund what needed to be done. Then Lewis left to deliver the treatment to the hospital. Olivia stood in the empty laboratory, surrounded by her security team, staring at the platinum card and the folder on the counter. She felt something she hadn't felt in years: shame. For the first time in her adult life, Olivia understood that she had been wrong about something fundamental. She had assumed that Lewis would waste her money on selfish pleasures because she had never considered that there might be things more important than pleasure. She had judged him as worthless because of his worn clothes and tired face, never wondering what circumstances had made him look that way. She picked up the folder and read through it carefully. Every receipt was itemized and explained. Every purchase had been necessary. Lewis hadn't spent a single dollar on himself. He hadn't even bought food during the 12 hours he worked. He had used her resources with more discipline and purpose than she had ever used her own. Olivia sat down on one of the lab stools and looked at her reflection in the dark window. She saw a woman in an expensive dress standing in a laboratory she didn't understand, holding receipts for equipment she couldn't name, feeling humbled by a man she had tried to humiliate. She stayed in that laboratory until dawn, reading the folder over and over, trying to understand how she had become the kind of person who would mock a father's desperation. She had built an entire empire on the idea that appearance mattered most, and in one night, a broke single father had proven that purpose mattered more. The children recovered. All 8 of them, including Lily McCrae, received Lewis's treatment within hours of him leaving the laboratory. The compound worked exactly as it was supposed to. Within 2 days, the children's respiratory symptoms improved dramatically. Within a week, they were healthy enough to go home. The hospital staff called it a miracle. Dr. Patel knew better. She knew it was science combined with desperation and an unexpected source of funding. She tried to contact Olivia Nelson to thank her, not knowing that Olivia had never intended to help at all. Olivia spent those same days quietly investigating Lewis McCrae's background. She learned about his brilliant career in biotech research, his sudden departure after his wife's death, his years working warehouse jobs to support his daughter. She learned that he had been living paycheck to paycheck, that he regularly donated plasma for extra money, that he had been selling his own research papers and equipment when Lily got sick to try to raise funds for her treatment. She also learned that Lewis had never told anyone at the hospital about where the funding for the compound had come from. He had simply delivered the treatment and returned to his warehouse job as if nothing unusual had happened. He hadn't tried to leverage the situation for recognition or reward. He had saved 8 lives and then gone back to his normal life. This bothered Olivia more than anything else. Lewis's humility made her own pride look grotesque. 3 weeks after the incident, Olivia made a decision. She shut down her lifestyle brand, the business that taught people how to elevate their presence through expensive appearances. She realized that she had been selling emptiness to people who were already empty. She had been profiting from the same shallow values that had nearly led her to enable 8 children's deaths through her indifference. She contacted Lewis and asked to meet with him. He agreed, though he seemed confused about why she wanted to talk. They met at a small cafe near the hospital, not in any of Olivia's luxury hotels. Olivia told Louis that she wanted to transform her company's mission. Instead of luxury hotels and lifestyle brands, she wanted to create a foundation that funded medical research for rare diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignored. She wanted to focus on the exact kind of situation Louis had faced. Cases where lives could be saved, but nobody would fund the work because it wasn't profitable enough. She asked Louis to lead the scientific division as chief of science. She offered him a salary that would let him stop working at the warehouse, time to focus on research, and resources to pursue treatments for diseases that only affected small numbers of people. Louis was skeptical at first. He had seen Olivia's cruelty firsthand and didn't trust that her transformation was genuine. But Olivia didn't try to convince him with words. Instead, she showed him the paperwork. She had already begun liquidating her luxury assets and establishing the foundation structure. She had already hired medical consultants and legal advisors. She had already committed millions of dollars to the project. Louis asked her why she was doing this. Olivia was honest. She told him that she had spent her entire life believing that wealth was about accumulation and display. She had measured her success by how expensive her clothes were, how impressive her buildings looked, how envious other people seemed to her lifestyle. She had never once asked what her wealth was actually for beyond maintaining her own sense of superiority. Then she had watched Louis spend $90,000 in 12 hours and save 8 lives. She had seen what purpose looked like. She had realized that her decades of accumulation had produced nothing of real value, while a single night of focused work had produced miracles. She told Louis that she couldn't undo the cruelty of handing him that card as a joke. She couldn't take back the contempt she had shown him in the hotel lobby, but she could at least make sure that her wealth started serving a purpose instead of just serving her vanity. Louis accepted the position, not because he forgave Olivia. He wasn't sure he did, but because he understood that the foundation could save lives. He could put his knowledge to use helping children like Lily, children whose conditions were too rare for pharmaceutical companies to care about, but too deadly to ignore. Over the next year, the foundation funded research into 17 different rare pediatric diseases. They created 3 new treatment protocols that saved over 200 children's lives. They hired 12 researchers who had been forced out of academia because their work wasn't commercially viable. They proved that medical research could be driven by need instead of profit. Olivia stepped back from public life. She no longer attended galas or gave speeches about success. She worked behind the scenes, managing the foundation's finances and logistics. She dressed simply and stopped measuring her worth by how she looked. She learned the names of every child the foundation helped and kept their photos in her office as a reminder of what money could actually accomplish. Louis never told Olivia that he forgave her, and she never asked him to. They worked together with a professional distance that both of them understood was appropriate. But on the 1-year anniversary of that night in the laboratory, Louis left a card on Olivia's desk. Inside, he had written a simple thank you, not for the credit card or the funding, but for being capable of change. That card was worth more to Olivia than any business award or magazine profile she had ever received. It meant that she had managed to transform from the kind of person who mocked desperation into the kind of person who served purpose. It meant that wealth, when used correctly, could redeem even the worst intentions. The Nelson Plaza still stood in the city, still beautiful and luxurious. But now its profits went to foundation instead of to Olivia's personal accounts. The marble lobby where Olivia had once humiliated a desperate father now displayed photos of the children the foundation had saved. And somewhere in that building, in a community room that was now offered free of charge, single parents gathered weekly to support each other, a program Louis had finally been able to start. Olivia learned that life wasn't about looking successful. It was about being useful. And Louis proved that sometimes the most valuable thing a person can do is show someone else how wrong they've been, not with words, but with purpose. This story teaches us that judging people by their appearance or current circumstances is not just unkind, it's foolish. Olivia's prejudice nearly cost 8 children their lives because she dismissed Louis based on his worn clothes and tired appearance. The broke single dad was actually a brilliant scientist fighting to save children, including his own daughter. True worth isn't measured by designer labels or polished surfaces, but by character, purpose, and what someone does when it matters most. We never know someone's full story from a single glance. The warehouse worker might be a former genius researcher. The person struggling to pay bills might be capable of miracles if given the right resources. Before we judge others, we should remember that everyone carries invisible burdens, hidden talents, and stories we can't see. Compassion and humility aren't just moral virtues. They're practical wisdom that prevents us from making devastating mistakes about who deserves our respect and resources. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comments section if you like part 2 of Olivia and Lewis's story. What new challenges will they face running the foundation together? Will Olivia's old colleagues try to sabotage her transformation? How will Lewis balance his research with raising Lily alone? Let me know if you want to hear more.